So research was one of the things that was really important when I was writing Miss E. The story takes place in 1967, so our country was involved in the Vietnam War, and at the same time, there were people at home that were starting to protest the war, starting to speak out and demonstrate to show their disagreement with what our government was doing. So there was a lot happening at that time, and I did not live during the 60s, so I knew that I was going to have to research in order to write a story that took place at that time. So there was definitely some research involved in just the setting, which is Northern California outside of San Francisco, and also the time period, 1967. The other thing that I spent a lot of time researching, maybe not so much researching, but more fact-checking, was here and there along the way as I was writing the story, I would get to things that I wasn't sure of. And because I wanted the story to be accurate, I felt like I needed to at least check my facts and make sure. So I wouldn't necessarily say it wasn't like historical research, but it was certainly, looking things up and making sure that the story I was writing was accurate to that time period and that setting. Just kind of a silly example, but there's a scene where Betsa's father is getting ready to leave to go to Vietnam, and they make a promise with each other. And originally I had written Bets saying, pinky swear. And I don't know if that, I don't really know when that term came into use, but I realized that it was probably a more modern term. And so I couldn't find an exact date, but I did some research and confirmed, well, yeah, that probably wasn't necessarily in use in the 60s. So I switched it to cross my heart. So that's just kind of a silly example of some facts that I at least wanted to check to make sure that I was accurate. The other piece of research that was really important was around the character of Miss E. So without giving a spoiler, Miss E is based on a real person, a historical person in American history. So I knew that I was really going to have to research her to the point where I felt like I knew her as a person and could create her as a character. Those books where you read it and you feel like the character is a real person, like you're right there next to them. And I wanted to work toward that. So I read a lot about this person until I felt like I really knew her and could create her in my story. And I was actually lucky to have several primary sources. She wrote 2 or 3 books about her life. So those were really good sources of information about how she talked and how she thought about things, which was really useful when I created the character of Miss E. And then the last thing that I did for research was use photographs. And I don't necessarily think of photographs right away. When I think of research, I tend to think of text sources. But photographs ended up being a really, really good source of information when it came to creating a scene and figuring out how would it feel to be there, or how is this character feeling being in this situation, because they're great collection of photographs from that time period, photographs of the war and the protests at home, and soldiers coming home from the war, and there's so much feeling and so much emotion in the people in those photographs that they were a great way to really get a sense of what would it be like to be in that situation, or what would it be like to be that person. How would that person feel or react? So really all those things, researching the time period, researching the character, and then definitely photographs just to get a sense of how people would feel. Those were all really important pieces of the research that I did to write Miss E.